Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Christina Rose, Director of Strategic Alliances at Foundation Source, and I will be facilitating today's webinar discussing how our Foundation clients are meeting this moment and responding to the COVID-19 crisis. Before we get started, I want to first send best wishes to you, your families, and your communities. We are in the midst of a challenging time in the U.S. and around the world, and I know we are all seeking out ways to be of service. So for anyone who's not, we are the nation's largest provider of comprehensive support services for private foundations. We were founded in 2000, headquartered in Fairfield, Connecticut, and we have a national footprint. We have over 140 employees. We administer $15 billion in assets. We do not custody assets at Foundation Source. Our clients do work with their investment firms. We have foundations that range in asset size from $250,000 to over $1 billion. We have 6,500 users on our online platform, Foundation Source Online. And to date, our foundations have granted out 304,000 grants totaling over $5 billion. So we have some very generous private foundations that we work with. So in short, what we do is we help families, individuals, and businesses make a difference in the world. And how we do it, we think of foundation services in terms of three pillars: administration, which encompasses accounting, compliance monitoring, transaction processing, tax preparation and filing, and financial and grant reporting. We wrap that within our technology platform, the Foundation Source Online, to make it easy for anyone to grant and maintain their foundation activities. And we also support the client through a variety of advisory services. Before we get started, I want to first send, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I apologize. I wanted to take a quick moment to talk about Wi-Fi and phone connections for today. Probably, like most of you, we are working remotely. And while we don't anticipate any technical issues during the broadcast, but if any one of us loses connection, just know we will quickly get it resolved and resume the webinar. If you experience problems yourself, you can try exiting and then rejoining the broadcast. Also, audio may be better via phone than on the computer, and it will also reduce some of the strain on your Wi-Fi connection. Just one quick note, this is the first time that we are doing our webinars with video included, so we're excited about that. And if there are any technical difficulties that come up with that, please, I beg your understanding. The questions for today can be submitted at any time via the GoToWebinar dashboard on your screen, and we will be leaving time at the end of today's presentation to address your questions. If we do not have time to address all of your questions, please know that we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague. Stefanie Borsari heads the Foundation Source's Client Services Department, a team comprised of 37 private client advisors. The private client advisors are the relationship managers who support our 1,600 clients directly with the engagement, with the management and administration of their private foundations, and they facilitate their access to and engagement with a full array of services. Stefanie has been with Foundation Source for over 13 years and is a proven leader and practice professional. She has spent her entire career in the nonprofit sector and has been in leadership fundraising positions at a community-based dance company, an academic medical center, and a private university. And with that, Stefanie, take it away.
Thank you, Christy. Hello, everybody. I am delighted to be with you here today and to have this opportunity to talk about the work that keeps all of us at Foundation Source fired up and engaged in our professional lives. We get to work directly with difference makers and their trusted advisors, such as the two ladies that you're seeing with me on the screen right now. And I will give them their proper introductions in a few moments. We get to work with these folks to put good into the world, and although it sounds a bit cliche, to make that world a better place for all of us. And that is what philanthropy is, isn't it? A way to make an impact in whatever way is important to you as individuals and families and organizations engaging in making a difference and in bettering society, and at whatever financial level is possible for your means. During the next hour, I'll share some historic examples of some very well-known private foundations' impact. We'll discuss briefly how the current environment can inform both organized and informal philanthropy, and share some inspired examples of giving by current Foundation Source clients. And then during the best part of our time together, we will hear directly from these two clients who will describe their organization's inspired philanthropy. And then, as Christy noted, we'll leave some time at the end for your questions that you may pose to both of them. The first is to share with you the legacy of private foundations. I was personally unaware of the private foundation impact on each of these major initiatives that continue to impact the world today. Sesame Street, as it turns out, was in combination with the Carnegie Corporation, which was a philanthropic fund established by Andrew Carnegie, provided an initial $1 million grant to establish the Children's Television Workshop in 1968. And then the Ford Foundation joined with the U.S. federal government and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to provide the Children's Television Workshop's first year budget of $8 million, which then produced Sesame Street. Vaccines, a hot topic for today. In 1925, a promising yellow fever vaccine was being tested in the labs of Rockefeller Institute in New York. And then in 1937, the Rockefeller Foundation itself funded a large-scale manufacturing of the vaccine that continues to be the primary vaccine against yellow fever today. And as you're probably aware, the Gates Foundation is a leader in the vaccine area as well, as it seeks to eradicate polio by delivering universal access to immunization as part of its global vaccine action plan. The hospice movement, in 1980, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation awarded a grant to the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals, JCAHO, to investigate the status of hospice and to develop standards for hospice accreditation, thus helping to formalize and standardize care methodologies that are being carried out today. The Joint Commission Hospice Accreditation Program was implemented in the early 80s, and it was followed by accreditation programs initiated by other health organizations over the following decades. The Green Revolution, which began in the 1930s, was supported by international government agencies, the United Nations, and the Rockefeller Foundation as a leader in the philanthropy sector. And it sought to help reduce food insecurity through the transformation of agricultural productivity. This initiative developed technology, new methods of cultivation, including mechanization, expanded irrigation infrastructure, and enhanced seed and fertilizer distribution techniques. And of course, 911, the system that we all take for granted today, was launched by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in the early 70s and became the nation's first unified emergency communication system. There's a fantastic article actually as part of the Foundation's Roots and Wings series on its website that describes this history, if you'd like to investigate it further. And we at Foundation Source are seeing firsthand how philanthropists are stepping up in a big way to address the current health and global crises. For example, it could be a knee-jerk reaction, or there could be a tendency to say, we're in an uncertain time and therefore we don't know what's going to happen to the foundation and to its funds and with its funds. And so maybe I'll hold on to them until things settle down and get a bit clearer. But at the same time, this might be a time to keep in mind what your foundation was designed to do. And remember, it was probably designed to help in moments of need and to make a difference and to improve society. And we are seeing our clients respond. They're changing their plans. They're determining how to respond within their missions to the crises. Some are making exceptions in their regular missions, while others are actually using their missions to guide their responses. Many of our clients are listening to the nonprofits. What is it that they need? How can you really help in a meaningful and impactful way with your nonprofit partners? And what does the community need? And how can you address that? And then lastly, a spending plan. You may have planned to grant out a certain number of dollars in 2020, and you might need to adjust that. Do you need to grant more this year? Do you need to redirect your funds this year? That's, of course, an individual decision that each family and each foundation and each entity will have to make. And we are certainly seeing our foundation clients behave very individualistically based on their own values and missions and their giving strategies. Certainly what our clients and their financial advisors are considering and discussing with one another and with those of us at Foundation Source. So many of our clients have stepped up in response to the current crises, and here are some amazing quick examples of our clients' special efforts on COVID-19 relief efforts. There's a family foundation that launched a fundraising challenge to their community to match up to $25,000. Those funds are providing food support to low-income locals that have been laid off due to the coronavirus. And the community's come through. They've met the $25,000 challenge, and the foundation purchased something like 500 gift cards from their local supermarket and distributed them to qualifying locals in need. There was an in-kind grant that supported the purchase of raw materials to manufacture, to assemble, and then distribute protective plastic face masks, 2,000 to start, to New York-based hospitals to be worn over the well-known N95 masks. This family foundation is also paying furloughed restaurant employees in their local community to assemble and to pack them. So meeting both the economic need due to the downturn as well as the health crisis directly. One foundation had previously provided a loan before all this started to the municipality of their local and rural community to support the struggling government. The foundation's forgiven the interest on that loan through the end of 2020, which, according to one of the elected officials, will allow the government to keep 1 or 2 staff members on board who may have lost their jobs otherwise. And then one of our corporate foundations, foundation clients, through Foundation Source's Grants to Individuals program, is providing emergency assistance grants directly to doctors to help alleviate their lodging costs for those who are unable to return to their personal homes for fear of potentially infecting their family members. And then, of course, we're seeing contributions of all sizes, from modest to quite substantial, to 501c3 public charities for directly related relief. They're purchasing ventilators at local hospitals. They're supporting organizations that provide food to the children missing their daily meals at school, to the Red Cross, as well as to their favorite organizations who are not necessarily specifically related to health and economic issues, to provide necessary funding to help keep those organizations afloat. And now, the best part, I'm delighted to introduce you directly to 2 of our wonderful clients doing amazing work through their foundations, both of which have swiftly and creatively responded to the health and economic crisis. Dr. Kathryn Flores, President of the Windhover Foundation, and Executive Director for Mozaik Philanthropy, Keely Badger. I think we'll start with the Windhover Foundation, please, who's really been directly focusing its efforts on the health crisis most specifically. I'm pleased to welcome you, Kathryn, to the conversation, and I appreciate so much your time and willingness to showcase your work. The Windhover Foundation's been a Foundation Source client for about 3 years, although it has been in existence since the early 80s, so much older than that. And I remember some of the early conversations that other members of Foundation Source and I engaged in with foundation representatives at Windhover back in the day when we were considering working together to begin with. So it's wonderful to connect now and to see the work the foundation has undertaken at this point. Kathryn, the Windhover Foundation is one of Foundation Source's very first clients to address the need for masks. And it did so with what could probably just simply be described as a Kickstart grant, but the initiative that you have launched is so much more than that. Would you please tell us about the Foundation's history and the Face Mask Aid Initiative and how the Windhover Foundation got here from there?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. Let's just start by talking about the Windhover Foundation, which was begun by my parents, Betty and Harry Quadracci. And they really founded their mission for the foundation was all about the communities where our printing company, Quagraphics, has locations, which is now across the world. But specifically, they cared about the communities within our country, within the United States. And whether it's buying ambulances for the local municipalities, supporting art museums, building baseball fields, women's shelters, scholarships for our employees, it's really, the mission is to any community that our family is a part of, to support that community in whatever way we can. I'm a doctor by training. My husband is chairman of thoracic surgery at Mount Sinai. And I would say, so I was uniquely tuned in to this coming pandemic. My mother had polio as a child and suffered consequences of that for the rest of her life. So the idea of a pandemic loomed large in our family. And I started watching this in, I guess it was early December. And my husband said, "Why are you so obsessed with this thing?" And I said, "Because it's coming here." And I'm sorry that it ended up happening. When I was a kid, I was candy striping in high school at the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin, bringing the treats cart around Saturday nights to the rest of the kids. And there was a brochure for the 75th anniversary of the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. And my mother was on the front cover of it. Unbeknownst to her and unbeknownst to the Children's Hospital, they didn't know who it was. And she was the first polio patient in Milwaukee. She had gone to the beach that morning, came home, and then was unable to even lift her head up for the next 2 years. So this pandemic was personal to me, not only in our family's history, but also because my husband was in the epicenter of the epicenter. And I knew from watching the Ebola epidemic in Africa that the system would not be able to keep up with PPE, with masks, gloves, and that kind of thing. So I got to work early, and I was lucky enough to collaborate not only with Foundation Source, which without Foundation Source, I don't know that I would have undertaken this, because so much was moving in our world during that time. And I knew with having them as the back office that I'd be able to tackle this challenge. I have a friend, Patty Virage, whose husband is one of Ralph Lauren's chief menswear designers. And so she and I got involved together with a bunch of people in the fashion industry who were out on furlough. And many of those people in the fashion industry out on furlough had sewing machines at home. And we hooked up with Justin Christensen, who's the CEO of Hurdling, which usually makes men's pants in Brooklyn. And he had a factory, and his people were out of work, and we were all ready to go. And so with a $50,000 grant from Wendover, we purchased the first 10,000 masks coming off the line at the same time that we set up a GoFundMe, which raised an additional $25,000. And then finally, you can see the link, we now have facemaskaid.com with a buy 5, donate 5 model. And I'll just, so this is designed by me as a surgeon, knowing exactly how to use masks. It comes with 5 really good face masks, which I did as best as I could without being official PPE. It has 2 cotton layers with a non-woven polypropylene filter in between, so it's a 3-ply, and it is washable. And the kit comes with 5 masks and then 2 bags. And what you're supposed to do is start with all your masks in the clean bag, and over the course of a day, instead of taking your mask off and leaving it on the car seat or sticking it into your purse, you put it in the dirty bag. And then when you get home, all of the masks and the 2 bags go in the wash. This virus, we're lucky, is very sensitive to heat and to detergent. And so you can throw it in the laundry and know that when you put your mask on again tomorrow, it's completely virus-free and you can move about your day. We've now submitted a video PSA to the governor's competition in New York State for a public service announcement for Face Mask Aid. And so far, I think we funded 27,000 masks. It was interesting, one of the places that we donated masks to. We donated 2,000 to the Medical College of Wisconsin and Froedtert Hospital and Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. And the doctors and nurses liked them so much that the medical college came back and bought 15,000 masks from us. So they found the masks useful enough that they, after testing them and having people wear them, that they paid us and furthered our donation of masks. Our masks are in firehouses in New York City. They're in hospitals, public hospitals in Brooklyn that have been hard hit, and Queens. They're on Navajo Indian reservations where there's not a lot of running water. We've been partnering with Dig Deep, which supplies water to the Navajo Indians, and food pantries in Chicago, Milwaukee. So it's actually been a really exciting for me, sitting at home with my kids while my husband's on the front lines, to be able to do something. And all of those sewers, Justin's been able to send them kits with the fabric pre-cut. They go out in groups of 50, and then the home sewers sew those 50 and then send them back to us. So I would say that the best part about Foundation Source and what it's done for us is I would consider it to be a force multiplier. And if I didn't know, I had Linda Faria sitting there helping me document where these masks are going, because we have to donate them to 501c3s, at least the Windhover purchased ones. The ones that are funded through the GoFundMe don't have to be donated to 501c3s. So she's really helped me with all the details and really made it possible for this effort to move forward.
Thank you so much for that, Kathryn. The Windhover Foundation too is a multiplier. Thank you for the unsolicited comments about Foundation Source and our stellar private client advisor, Linda. Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to share that with us, and we'll look forward to connecting again in a moment with a panel discussion. Keely, for a completely different take on philanthropic response, perhaps a little bit more specifically in response to the economic fallout of the health crisis, we introduce you as Executive Director for Mozaik Philanthropy. And Mozaik Philanthropy is a longtime client, joined us in 2007 as a Foundation Source client, so lucky 13 this year. There have been a lot of changes, lots of projects and exciting initiatives by this foundation throughout its history. I believe Foundation Source established Mozaik Philanthropy in, helped with its formation documents. So that's another difference between Mozaik and Windhover Foundation. But the Mozaik Future Art Awards is one of the Foundation's amazing and exciting and unique initiatives. Could you, Keely, please share with us a bit of the history of the Foundation and how it has evolved throughout the years? And as part of that, we'd love to hear how the Foundation's most recently launched initiative was created and what it's doing in response to the current environment.
Sure. Thank you so much, Stefanie and Christy from earlier. It's a pleasure to be here with Foundation Source today, and thank you for organizing such an important discussion, I know, during a really challenging time. And, first and foremost, I'd love to mention that Mozaik Philanthropy was formerly operating as Netta Nobari Foundation. We were founded in 2007 by our founder, Netta Nobari, and I think we've always considered our philanthropy to be both deeply experimental, but also deeply intentional. And what I mean by that is we've always been committed to supporting social and environmental justice. We've worked a great deal in California at the local level, specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area, and more recently now across the Los Angeles community. Also undertaking a few national and international projects over the years. But we've really never been afraid to change our mission and to adapt it to the times that we're living in. I sort of consider our mission and really our broader vision as a foundation essentially to be somewhat like a living document, where we always want to be in a process of self-reflection and really questioning our assumptions about philanthropy and impact and how we can ultimately make the greatest difference with the resources and the tools that we have. And so In January of 2020, we did rebrand under a new name and a mission. We are operating now as Mozaik Philanthropy. I can get a bit more into the details of the reason for that rebrand later in the webinar. But I think for us, when the pandemic hit, it became important for us to model our new mission throughout our rapid relief response efforts. Our new mission is really ultimately to democratize philanthropy with a concerted effort to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion are taken into account in everything that we do, in the programs that we build, in the grantees ultimately that we work with, and especially I think in terms of how we speak about philanthropy. I think that movement towards diversity, equity, and inclusion is more important than ever. So we had, I think a rare opportunity when the pandemic hit, first and foremost, to really think about how we could help the local community here in Los Angeles. So our first response before the Art Awards was actually to work with the California Community Foundation. They had a really wonderful COVID-19 LA County Response Fund that flowed grants very quickly to schools that had experienced school closures, of course, homeless residents, health clinics in need, and of course, providing direct cash assistance to nonprofits and small businesses and individuals. So I think once we felt that we had, in our way, addressed the most immediate needs of our local community, we turned to an area of focus that I think has been developing for the foundation really over the last 13 years since our inception, which is really focusing on the power of the arts, and the arts community, of course, being one deeply impacted by COVID-19, not only in terms of artists' ability to create art and seek funding for art, but also because so many artists are also gig economy workers, and so that those sort of part-time or even full-time jobs have now been incredibly threatened. And so I think we felt a real sense of urgency to build a program that supported artists, but again, with this commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what we decided to do was actually bring together a group of flow funders in the arts that we had worked with in 2019 here in Los Angeles. These were community change makers working across the spectrum of the art sector, who we had brought together to actually determine grants to local organizations and artists working in the arts. And they were a wonderful group to sort of mobilize quickly and bring together to serve as jurors for what we've called now the Mozaik Future Art Awards. And so in early April, we went out with a call for submissions nationwide to artists to submit their art as it relates to the pandemic, but art that can really help us reimagine alternative futures. And I think we're standing now in a moment in human history where that imagination and the creative exploration of what could come next for humanity from a social and environmental justice standpoint is so important. So we were committed to getting that call out to artists. We opened the awards to all US-based artists of all mediums. We wanted to make sure that we were programming the awards in a really trauma-sensitive way to make sure we weren't putting excessive burdens on artists in their application process. So we simply asked for artists to submit a link of their work, and if they chose, a brief 500-word description or video description of their work. And I'm happy to say that our judges are now in the process of reviewing over 1,000 works of art that have come into us. And we will be actually announcing the 10 featured artists, the 10 winning artists, who will each receive a $2,000 cash prize from us, as well as a feature in a virtual exhibition that we are building out for June. So it's been a really wonderful creative process for us. I think it's been our own unique way to support the arts community. And I think I can say with confidence that it's a program that I think we'd be interested in continuing to run for years to come, and depending on the dynamics of the current pandemic, perhaps also offering a series of other awards across other aspects of the arts sector in the coming months.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm loving hearing about the awards to the artists and the fact that this is really helping to prioritize one of the cultural pillars of our country, which so many folks are addressing the health concerns and immediate restaurant workers, et cetera. And this is really going deep to help preserve culture and arts, which I'm personally grateful for. I thank you very, very much, Keely, and I'd like to welcome Kathryn back. Hi, Kathryn. Hi, Keely, to the panel discussion of our webinar today. These are two really different foundations. Windover is almost 40 years old, and Kathryn, I understand it's governed by the second generation, of which you are a part. And that's in contrast to Mozaik, which is a relatively young, 13 years old in comparison, with the original donor still quite active in the foundation's governance and operations. And although these foundations have very differing missions and foci, we can still identify a number of commonalities, including and especially in the foundation's values, as demonstrated in the responsiveness to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first that I was struck by in both our conversations earlier as well as today is the concept of community. Both of the foundations value and focus on serving specific communities, and you both identified and listed some of those off for us. At the same time, you've also enlisted communities and brought them together to perform in service to carrying out the philanthropic missions and activities. Would you each please talk a little bit more about how you've identified your community partnerships, how you pulled those collaborations together, and maybe if something surprised you during that experience?
Keely, you want to take it first?
I'm happy to. Thanks, Kathryn. That's a great question. I think, community and particularly localized philanthropy has always been a cornerstone of the work that we've done both at Neda Foundation and now at Mozaik. Previously, we were based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and during that time, so much of our philanthropy was rooted in localized giving, and particularly seeking out communities and organizations serving demographics that were particularly impacted by gentrification or lack of access to fundamental human rights, really food, water, housing, healthcare, education. And I think through that localized giving, we were able to build really strong, lasting partnerships and collaborations with organizations. I would say that the impact or the scope of those relationships, went far beyond sort of the traditional transfer of funds, but really finding ways to also bring nonprofits together and create more of a sustainable culture in philanthropy, where you have donors and organizations working collaboratively to make a difference. And I think we really adopted that same philosophy when we pivoted down to Los Angeles in January of this year, where getting out into the local community and building those really fundamental relationships early on were critical. And our philanthropy has evolved over the years. Something that we sought out last year was sort of a new model where we could ensure that not only were we being extremely collaborative with communities, but actually really working hands-on with community leaders who understand the needs of their communities the best, and to actually empower them not only with the financial capital of the foundation, but also really with the social capital. I think the dynamics of power and philanthropy maybe aren't discussed enough, but I think for us it was important to sort of empower everyday community leaders and who we really consider to be social visionaries with the full might and force of the foundation, which in some ways is a scary step. Most foundations don't want to surrender sort of the right to determine where those funds go. But we discovered a new model in philanthropy called flow funding. We've been really fortunate to work with an extraordinary organization out of New Mexico called Kindle Project. And they've really taken this model that was initially developed by Marion Rockefeller Weber in the early 90s, and actually bring this model to foundations and help them facilitate flow funds and really imbue their grant making with a flow fund methodology, which is essentially to bring together a group of community change agents and to discuss an issue or a theme. In our case, we really wanted to focus on the arts in Los Angeles, and to really learn from those community change makers how we could make the most difference and ultimately empower them to flow grants to those organizations that were making the greatest difference. So we piloted this model in July of last year, and I think through that model, and particularly now also being able to go back to those flow funders and grantees to serve as judges for our future art awards, it's shown us that participatory grant making, we feel, is really the future of philanthropy, because it does bring in those new voices and viewpoints and ideas and that creativity into philanthropy in a whole new way. So I think it's emboldened our ability to say, yes, we've committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and here are the extraordinary flow funders that are carrying out that work for us in their communities.
Thank you. Kathryn, did you have anything to add?
Well, I think, so our foundation is now run by the four siblings, myself, my sister Elizabeth, my brothers Joel and Richard, and we live in different places. We come together for philanthropy in Wisconsin, where our company was founded, where we all grew up. My brother Richard lives in Florida, my sister Elizabeth lives in Connecticut, and my brother Joel still lives in Wisconsin. And so it's a little hard because, wow, we're in all these different communities. But I think Face Mask Aid is the perfect example of how you using philanthropy, using your organization can start to sow the seeds that then blossom. And so I called my siblings and I said, you know, I think there's going to be a real need for masks. We've got to get going on this. And right away, they all signed up with a donation and said, okay, you run with it. Called my friend Patty, and all of a sudden the ball starts rolling, and now we have seamstresses all over the metropolitan area who are doing it, and we're affecting places as far away as New Mexico with the Navajo Indians. So, you know, you never know how it's going to unfold and who's going to then come in once you lay the groundwork and you give the energy that gets everything going. And I think it's the same for you, Keely. Right, you guys started this thing, and then people are attracted to that. They're attracted to passion, to mission, and this was an easy sell to people. And we now have people helping with the PSA announcement, with the website, and it's amazing how giving people are of their time once you get going. And it was the Windhover grant that started it, but now people all over the country are buying masks and donating money when they buy those masks to keep the mask initiative going. So
yeah. You've both identified ways to collaborate and pull all of these different people together who want to do something, and you've given people an outlet and a way to participate in really important activities. It's also really amazing to hear how the initiatives you both described today were able to come together so quickly using that community concept and in such focus to address both current and very acute needs in our country and in your target communities. And I imagine many of your foundation's current and prior grantees have also had to adjust their own organization's priorities and perhaps redirect funds that your foundations, in fact, had previously given. Are you engaging in such conversations with your grantees? And if you are, how have you worked with them? What does that experience look like? How does that play out in practical terms for both of you and your philanthropy and your grantees?
Kathryn, I'll let you lead on this one if you'd like to dive in, or I'm happy, whichever.
Well, we can alternate who goes first. So one of the organizations in Milwaukee that we've always supported is the Hunger Task Force. With large donations every year, just because we think it's part of being a good community member in Wisconsin. Hunger is surprisingly continues to be an issue in our country, and even more so now. And so one of the first calls I made once we got the mask initiative was to call them and say, what do you need? And it was interesting how they said, well, now we actually need masks. because we're dealing with many more people. One of the other organizations that my partner Patty Barrage is associated with is a food pantry in Chicago, which is now operating out of Wrigley Field parking lot. No water, no, so it's sort of interesting. Yes, we provide money to give the food, but they had these, and they were unable to get PPE because the hospitals were sucking up all of the materials. And so my brother is also, he has a microbrewery he's an investor in, and they switched over in Wisconsin to start making gallons of hand sanitizer. And so this was another thing of just talking to people, and suddenly the brewery is sending hand sanitizer down to the parking lot at Wrigley Field. The masks are coming from the home sewers in New York, and we're all benefiting because my mask saves you and your mask saves me. And so it's just, you know, if you're talking to people, it's funny how things, God sort of sets it up that it all connects back together, and it's a small world at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the responsiveness, we've always been a pretty nimble foundation. So I think we've always felt that we could change our grant making practice, even our mission to the times, which we certainly did, particularly during the travel ban a few years ago, where we realized we needed to pivot quickly in our responsiveness to assist marginalized communities. And I think, you know, this time during the pandemic has been similar in some ways. I think we saw this really as a moment to demonstrate our commitment to trust-based philanthropy with our grantees. We had several public art initiatives in the works here in Los Angeles with commissioned artists that unfortunately have required us to push pause on those projects given the circumstances. But we did want to make sure, particularly because artists are so heavily impacted, that we flowed those grants to the artists regardless. We reached out immediately to a number of our organizations on multi-year commitment pledges and asked them if they needed us to issue those grants now and quickly. And of course, all of them said yes. And so we were happy to quickly flow out those grants to those organizations. We've never been a foundation that's placed many restrictions on the grants that we've issued, but we have been proactively going out to grantees to ask them what they need. Have they had to lay off staff? Are there programs that we can assist them with bringing virtual? All of the ways that we can sort of lend, again, both our financial and our social sort of intellectual capital to the needs of those organizations. We've made really every attempt to. And I think even down to sort of administrative considerations as simple as offering to wire grant monies as opposed to sending checks that would force grantees to visit the office or have to go sort of take that extra step to deposit checks. So just making sure there was an immediacy in our response. I think we also really adapted the Future Art Awards to that. We wanted to make sure initially that our judges received equitable honorariums and that we got those out to those judges, many of whom are artists, before, you know, the 1st of May, so that they were in a better position for rents due. And we've adopted that same practice now in May when we do announce the winners. We're committed to making sure that the winners receive their $2,000 cash prizes again before the 1st of the month, which we know is an approaching and looming date for many impacted by the pandemic. And I think, you know, something that we were really inspired by early on in March was a particular pledge that came out from the Council of Foundations. They put a call out to foundations to sign a pledge that would loosen or release restrictions on any of their current grants, make new unrestricted grants to grantees, and support community-based emergency relief efforts and policy efforts at the community level. So we were very happy to sign that pledge and to also encourage a lot of other foundations in our network to do the same. I think that's particularly important demonstration of our commitment to realizing the circumstances of our grantees during this time.
Thank you for that. You also touched on in that response the idea of advancing funds, and that sounds to me like it's probably an adjustment to the foundation spending plan, because if they were multi-part grants, then they were going to be staggered over a period of time, and that's clearly adjusting the spending plan. You know, Keely, since we've agreed that we'll go back and forth here, would you address this then? Even in your responsiveness, the foundation's responsiveness to the critical and immediate needs, as the foundation considers the future, what will be the non-negotiable priorities for your foundation during this time of uncertainty and necessary change? And then, of course, Kathryn, you'll have a moment to think about your answer to that question too.
That is a great question, and I think our response is evolving every week as we sort of learn more about the longevity and the impact of the pandemic across certain industries. I will say that within our commitment to the arts, we've run this first awards. It was our first ever awards that we've run, so we've learned a tremendous amount. We'll be launching the virtual exhibition featuring these award winners in June. And I know that we feel that sort of the next stage of our pandemic relief will be to run a similar competition for filmmakers. We do have a long-standing history of supporting social impact cinema. And I think just as much as sort of the traditional arts have really captured this moment and have I think given us an iconography actually of the times. I mean, so many of the art submissions we're receiving are of essential workers, healthcare workers, the mask. These have sort of become, and I think will live as historic markers of our time. And I know that we're deeply interested in film's ability to chronicle the lived experiences of Americans living in quarantine, but again, also to reimagine what the future could look like in a visual storytelling format. So we'll certainly be continuing on with that response. In terms of our budget, we did have several flow funds that we had scheduled for this year. One to work with social enterprise organizations here in Los Angeles, and another to address the imperative of responsible storytelling and fact-based storytelling. We're in the process of adapting both of those flow funds. Most likely we'll have to push at least one out to 2021 so that we can continue our pandemic relief response throughout the year. But I know we'll be able to continue with at least one of those, albeit perhaps virtually. In terms of, you know, our broader budget, we've never really been focused on the 5% in terms of the minimum distribution requirement of our philanthropy. I think we've taken it year by year and again adjusted, flexed up, and also really flexed up our the pro bono sort of time and services that we give to organizations based on the times. So I think that something that's non-negotiable for us is to ensure that we continue to just be responsive, present, and really keep our ears to the ground to make sure that whatever it is that we're building is based on the needs of the communities and the change makers that we're lucky to be partnering with.
Yeah. Kathryn, similarly, what are some of the non-negotiable priorities for the Windhover Foundation?
I would say the biggest priority is to continue to meet the needs of the organizations that we support, because in a time of stress like this, you have to sort of be the backbone that's still going to be there. We, as a multi-generation foundation, we have a 5% spending limit so that our generation is not spending down the next generation's funds, because we never know, you know, what's coming. Who would have thought that this world is dealing with the pandemic right now? And so I know I personally set aside money every year because I know something's going to come up, and I know my siblings do as well. I didn't know it was going to be this big, but I think just to continue to show up. I mean, we can't shirk our responsibility. Hunger Task Force, or to the women's shelter in Waukesha, Wisconsin, that's seeing, you know, the worst thing about being in quarantine is if you're in quarantine with someone who abuses you. So it's these kind of priorities of just continuing to show up, and try to carry the load and try to generate the energy and the enthusiasm that's going to bring in other people to help carry the load, because nobody can do it alone.
Yeah. Stefanie, I wonder if I could add one more just point to that, which is, I think this is a really interesting time for foundations, right? And on one hand, there's an incredible surge in demand of our time and programming and grant making related to, the 5%, the minimum distribution requirement. And then I think there's sort of the flip side of that, which is, the other 95% of our investment portfolios and how we're also speaking to the pandemic and those most affected through our investment practices. And so here at the foundation, one of our priorities this year is definitely to address our portfolio and to make sure that we're aligning our portfolio with our mission. And so I know that will look like divestment, which is the process we've already been engaged in for many years, but that will also look to what are the new investments that we need to make now that really are representative of that 5, 10, 20, 30-year trajectory of where we're at now and where we're going to be over the next decades, and really taking into account, I think, justice and what the world looks like for future generations. And I think we've had a glimpse now of how deeply interdependent we are as a global community. And so I think that this offers a great opportunity for foundations to reflect on, how also they're meeting the needs of the times and the future through their investment practices.
Thank you for that. Kathryn, I'm going to pivot to you here and switch gears completely, although you referenced the multi-generational component of the Windhover Foundation. And I feel like no conversation about private philanthropy is complete, particularly when we talk about private foundations, without discussion about engagement of the next generation. It's certainly a hot topic for philanthropic families. You've both talked about it in our conversations earlier. Kathryn, you very overtly mentioned it just now. Certainly it's a conversation that Foundation Source clients and our community at large is having regularly. And Kathryn, you are a second generation board member for your family's foundation. And could you share with us just a little bit about the responsibility and the joy and the burden perhaps of carrying such a position and how you navigate that? And then at the same time, how do you envision engaging your children and your nieces and your nephews, the third generation, with the foundation? What does that look like for Windhover Foundation?
Yeah, and so I think this is my son coming up the stairs from his class. In the background, talking about the next generation.
Perfect. He's perfectly timed.
This is Harry.
Hi, Harry.
Perfectly timed. Yeah, so, when my parents started this foundation in the 80s, our company was small. The foundation was super small. It was at a human scale. And when my father passed and the foundation was fully funded up, it became a huge foundation, what I would consider not at a human scale. Yeah. But yet we're relying on sort of the mom and pop shop to administer our foundation. I realized that isn't going to work now, that it's such a big foundation. And that's where I went out searching and interviewed several different companies to try to help manage. And we thought about hiring someone just on our own, but then you get to the point, well, when that person leaves, all of that knowledge then leaves with them. And I didn't want to have to continually manage turnover. And that's when I found Foundation Source, actually from one of your papers on next gen philanthropy. And I'm going to sound like this evangelical, Foundation Source not paying me to talk about.
I promise.
I promise. I've already sent several friends to Foundation Source. So it honestly changed my life, because when my mother then followed my father passing away, it was a lot on the four of us at a time when we were trying to manage a family business. We all had young kids. It was just their 11 grandchildren. And so finding something that we could sort of take the weight off. And one of the things that attracted me was the software primarily, because it made it super easy for me to track everything that's going on. The documents all get uploaded. But then the next generation philanthropy, and I had no idea how to go about starting that up. And so once a year, and my kids are the oldest of the 11 grandchildren, we get together with someone from Foundation Source. Originally it was John Oddie. And you know, it's interesting, so my kids are now 17, 19, 21. But so we started 3 years ago. So the youngest was 14. And so what do you say to a 14-year-old? And John was really clever. He brought us an article that kids had to read, so not too much of a bite to take, but about a family company that was a family foundation that was upset with the number of car accidents in this country. And they funded the white lines along the edges of the roads that, of course, now we take for granted because the government wasn't doing that. And the yellow lines in the center. And so every time I'm driving now, it's sort of funny at night, I'm thinking about those white lines and what that donation of a family foundation was able to accomplish. And of course, it's hard to stay on the road if there wasn't a white line to follow. And so I thought that was really such a great way to get my kids started, just like, what can you do? What have other people done? And I think also the thing on the software that's very helpful is I now give my kids a small amount of money via the gift certificates. I also give to my aunt and uncle certificates that they can use to grant, because my mother used to give her siblings, used to support the organizations her siblings supported. And so with her passing, I didn't want to, again, leave those organizations high and dry. And it's just made it really easy to sort of easy while along with giving me a roadmap for how to do it. So again, a force multiplier would be the term I would use.
Yeah, thank you for that. Keely, and you are, how have you helped to support the engagement of the Foundation's next generation of philanthropists, and what observations on that experience can you share with others who may be considering how to help build a multi-generational family legacy?
Sure. Well, I have to echo Kathryn's force multiplier in the sense that, you know, Foundation Source has been instrumental for us, particularly over the last year as we have been making that really exciting transition from one generation at the Foundation to the next. And Keely Badger, who's been our personal financial advisor at Foundation Source, has been incredible in terms of providing us information about next generation development, and also sort of how flexible we are as a foundation to allow for the exploration and sort of the joy of philanthropy, right, that is so important for that next generation to experience, how flexible we can be to enable that. And so my hat's off to Katie and to everyone at Foundation Source, because they've made my job to sort of navigate this process as an independent ED to a family office immeasurably easier, and also just much more enjoyable to feel that I've had that support and guidance and wisdom. In terms of sort of how we've gone about engaging the next generation, I come back to that model of flow funding, which was actually one of the reasons why we initially looked at it. I think we were looking for essentially a bit of an intimate forum, right, where that next generation could learn from community change makers about philanthropy, but more from a grassroots up standpoint. You know, I think so often in foundations, next generation inheritors of wealth learn about how to do philanthropy or the meaning of philanthropy from their family, which is wonderful. But something that we love about flow funding is it actually offers first-time philanthropists in the family to learn how the community sees the foundation, and to learn from that information, and to, I think, really be empowered with that information to then make the foundation their own, and to maybe adopt some new practices that improve the foundation based on those key insights from community leaders who are interfacing with the foundation in a different way. And so we ran a really wonderful flow fund, as I mentioned, in July of last year. And I think a lot of those relationships were really instrumental for the donor's eldest son, who is really representative of the next generation of philanthropists for Mozaik Philanthropy. And I think, again, it's challenging during the pandemic to do things like site visits and to really be able to meet nonprofit leaders face to face, but we're doing our best to sort of adapt and do things virtually for the time being. But all of those practices, I think, have been instrumental for us. And again, I think that practice of flow funding has really offered almost sort of a mini university around philanthropy, and particularly around issue areas within philanthropy that would be very hard to replicate without that sort of structure. So it's been a wonderful experience. It's still very much in the process of becoming. This is a year of experimentation for us, and it's been actually an incredible crash course in curating the Future Art Awards to sort of work through that decision making together and decide, hey, we really do want this art competition to reach, artists of color and Indigenous artists and queer artists and women and other historically marginalized communities, and to work through those offerings in our philanthropy. So, and again, Foundation Source has been instrumental.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. I just feel like I did, as in our earlier conversations, that we could sit around a table and talk for hours. Unfortunately, our time, I believe, is up, but I am going to defer to Christy to confirm that for me. I express my personal and professional thanks to both of you for sharing your stories, your observations, your insights. Thank you for your grace and your spirit in sharing that with us and to all of our listeners. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you and through our relationship going forward. Christy, what do we have?
Well, I just want to thank you, Stefanie, and Kathryn, Keely. It's been a wonderful discussion today, and I think, as everybody can see, these are complex issues. And when you're talking about addressing complex problems and still trying to stay aligned to the mission, keep families engaged, there is a lot to the conversation. So I know we didn't get to a couple of questions today. I do believe that Keely and Kathryn, you actually addressed them just in the course of your conversation, but we will follow up with those individuals to make sure that they had answers. And I just want to let everybody know, later this afternoon we'll be sending out the recording for this webinar to everyone who both registered and couldn't attend, and all those who attended. So you'll have a replay link so that you can listen to it later on. And if you would like any additional materials about how family foundations can respond in the wake of COVID-19, please feel free to follow up with us at info@foundationsource.com or our 800 number. It's 800-839-0054. While we are all working remote, we are all still working hard. So your email, your call will be answered. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We extend our sincere appreciation to those of you looking for ways to assist others in this challenging time. And this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Stefanie. Thank you, Kathryn.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.